Remember August 2021? In a matter of days, India shuttered its embassy in Kabul and flew its diplomats home on Indian Air Force C-17s after tense convoys were turned back by Taliban checkpoints and sensitive files were destroyed to protect lives and sources. 3 years later, Indian officials are back in Kabul, meeting Taliban ministers, while Delhi still refuses to recognize their rule. So how did New Delhi move from deep freeze to quiet engagement? And why did sacks of Indian wheat become the first bridge back? Here's the simple version. India sequenced its return. Aid first, contacts second, presence third. Recognition, still off the table. I'll show you the decision that brought India's mission back to Kabul, and why your dry fruit prices and trade routes tell the real story. When the Taliban entered Kabul in August 2021, India's response wasn't diplomacy. It was emergency logistics. Embassy staff and Indian nationals were airlifted in 2 C-17 sorties, about 180 to 200 people, during an all-night operation amid airport chaos and tense escorts. Left behind was a 2-decade footprint worth more than $3 billion, the Afghan-India Friendship Salma Dam, the Zaranj-Delaram Highway, transmission lines, schools, clinics, and the Afghan Parliament building. Visible symbols of goodwill that made India Afghanistan's most trusted development partner. Before the takeover, bilateral trade was humming near $1.5 billion in 2019 to 2020, driven by regular flows of dry fruits, saffron, medicinal herbs, and textiles. Then the economy hit a wall. Roughly $9.5 billion in Afghan central bank reserves were frozen abroad, slashing liquidity for imports and salaries. The country's GDP contracted by roughly 20% from 2020 to 2021, with cumulative losses by 2024 wiping out more than a quarter of the economy compared to pre-takeover levels.
بیکار هستن خصوصا همین جوانای ما پدرای ما تمامشون بیکار هستن.
In Delhi, the public line hardened. We'll judge by actions, not words. The private calculus was shaped by memory and risk. Indians remember Kandahar, flight IC-814, hijacked in 1999, diverted to Taliban-controlled territory, militants freed under duress, and Pakistan-based networks implicated. That episode still frames India's red lines whenever Afghanistan's rulers change overnight. Step 1 of India's sequence was aid, because the humanitarian cliff was steeper than the political one. By early 2022, the UN warned that more than half the country needed assistance, 24.4 million people in the humanitarian plan, and millions faced acute hunger through a brutal winter. India responded with grain, medicines, and vaccines, routed through neutral channels. New Delhi signed an MOU with the UN World Food Programme to deliver 50,000 metric tons of wheat overland via Pakistan, structured in multiple batches and handed over in Kandahar before nationwide distribution. The first 2,500-ton convoy rolled out in February 2022, followed by more shipments that brought the total to around 40,000 tons that year, with additional consignments in 2023. Alongside grain, India delivered 500,000 doses of Covaxin and batches of essential medicines through WHO and Kabul hospitals, deliberately branded Gift of the People of India to keep the focus on families, not politics. Aid opened doors, not to recognition, but to practical coordination. And in a moment, I'll show you the short, consequential meeting that quietly reopened India's Kabul presence, and how it rippled into prices and trade routes. Step 2 was contact. Short, calibrated, and focused on logistics and security. In early June 2022, India sent a senior delegation led by J.P. Singh to Kabul, the first official visit since the Taliban takeover. They met Acting Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi to review aid logistics, discuss security around India-built assets, and explore basic consular facilitation for Afghans and Indians. The message was clear: development plus security under a no-endorsement umbrella. Weeks later, Delhi re-established a presence. A technical team returned to the embassy compound, without an ambassador and without presenting credentials. explicitly to coordinate humanitarian assistance, oversee projects, and manage consular needs. Step 3 was presence, without recognition. It wasn't a full diplomatic reopening, but it was a foot in the door, enough to protect India's investments and maintain a line of communication in Kabul. Even as the Taliban tried to demonstrate control, the threat landscape remained unpredictable and lethal. A suicide bomber struck the Russian embassy in Kabul on September 5, 2022. In December, gunmen attacked Pakistan's embassy compound. ISKP later claimed responsibility. That forced Delhi to weigh two risks at once: direct threats to personnel and a strategic vacuum rivals could fill, and the trade numbers made those risks visible. Since 2021, India's exports to Afghanistan have slumped, down to about $350 million in 2023 and 2024, a 16-year low. At the same time, imports from Afghanistan surged to a record $667 million, driven by almonds, raisins, figs, apples, and saffron moving through border corridors and via Iran. For Indian buyers and small businesses, this meant more Afghan almonds and saffron reaching markets, even as India's own exports stayed cautious. If you saw prices and availability shift, you were watching geopolitics play out in your grocery basket. China struck a 25-year oil extraction deal with Xinjiang Central Asia Petroleum and Gas Company in the Amu Darya Basin, with early commitments climbing into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Iran's cross-border commerce with Afghanistan surged since 2021, with recent figures showing Afghanistan's imports from Iran exceeding $3.14 billion in 2024, an 84% jump year-on-year. Russia hosted Taliban officials and kept its embassy open despite ISKP threats, maintaining an active economic and political channel. Delhi's calculus became simple: don't cede the room. Show up enough to shape outcomes. Keep humanitarian flows moving, protect India-built assets, preserve connectivity options, and above all, draw a hard line between engagement and endorsement. That connectivity piece matters more than any single photo op. In May 2024, India and Iran signed a long-term agreement to develop and operate the Shahid Beheshti terminal at Chabahar port, a 10-year framework that gives India a durable route into Afghanistan and onward to Central Asia, bypassing Pakistan and hedging against border politics, subject to sanctions risk and compliance. For India's broader regional strategy, this corridor is a lifeline. It insulates trade and projects from Pakistani choke points and keeps supply lines moving even as Afghan politics remain volatile. So what exactly is India's policy today? Pragmatic engagement without recognition. In practice, that means aid flows and talks continue, technical teams and diplomats coordinate projects and visas, and Indian officials attend development-focused forums where necessary. But ambassadors do not present credentials. Formal recognition is withheld until actions, not words, meet India's red lines. Those red lines haven't moved. India will not accept Afghan territory being used as a haven for militants targeting India, whether Pakistan-based groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, or ISIS-K networks that amplify regional instability. Judge by actions is applied where it counts. Cross-border terror, security guarantees around Indian projects, and verifiable steps to reduce extremist threats. For the Taliban, necessity drives engagement. Afghanistan's economy remains far below pre-2021 levels. Poverty is widespread, and households depend on aid and remittances to survive. The leadership needs international assistance, trade, and legitimacy by osmosis, that quiet normalization that comes from meetings, photos, and forums. India's approach is to talk just enough to prevent a monopoly of influence by rivals, never enough to imply recognition. 3 tracks will matter: humanitarian support, connectivity, and risk management. On humanitarian support, India has continued to budget assistance. 2 billion rupees earmarked in 2022 to 2023 was a public signal of intent, and will likely maintain medical and food aid while keeping earlier projects safe and functional where feasible. The label, Gift of the People of India, will stay, and deliveries will keep flowing through neutral channels that help Afghans without conferring legitimacy. On connectivity, the Chabahar corridor will be the workhorse. Expect incremental progress on operations, customs, and multimodal links from India's west coast to Iran and into Afghanistan. Practically, that means smoother movement for Afghan exports into India: dry fruits, saffron, and other agricultural goods. and selective Indian exports back to Afghanistan, especially pharma and essentials, as security and logistics allow. On risk management, ISKP remains active and opportunistic. Embassies and public venues stay on alert. India will emphasize intelligence exchanges, hardening compounds, controlled movements, and limiting on-ground exposure to calibrated, essential engagements. The guiding rule is simple: protect human life, protect Indian projects, and protect strategic options. There's also a long-horizon question: resources. Mezainak, one of the world's major untapped copper deposits, has seen stop-start Chinese interest since 2008. Broader estimates of Afghanistan's mineral wealth range into the hundreds of billions, sometimes quoted near $1 trillion. But in reality, resource development depends on security, contract enforcement, community consent, and sanctions compliance. Any future Indian role would likely be highly selective, structured for transparency, and geared toward local employment rather than splashy optics.
Now zoom out. Did India actually flip? Not really. It sequenced. First came wheat and medicines, humanitarian aid that created a narrow but dependable corridor for cooperation. Then came the first meeting in Kabul, short, calibrated, focused on logistics and security around Indian-built assets. Then came the technical team, reopening a presence without reopening politics. And finally, a posture of engagement without recognition. Presence in rooms that matter, a hand on the levers of aid and connectivity, and a hard red line against conferring formal legitimacy. That's India's playbook. Aid first, contact second, presence third. Recognition only if actions beat words. In a crowded chessboard, that sequence protects India's long investments in Afghan dams, roads, and public buildings. It keeps routes into Central Asia open via Chabahar. It maintains leverage against rivals whose presence is growing in Kabul. And it ensures the humanitarian pipeline didn't collapse in the worst months after the takeover. If you watch India-Afghanistan trade flows, you can see the strategy in the numbers. Cautious exports out of India, robust imports from Afghanistan into Indian markets, and a premium on corridors that work, no matter who sits in Kabul.